in the book, we spend quite a bit of time trying to identify and discuss global challenges, both global challenges that face the world community today and those that are likely to be of interest to students who are reading the books and who will be making decisions and being an important part of world affairs tomorrow. John, could you say a few words about what you see as the major contemporary and future global challenges that
Sure.
you would like students to think about carefully?
Good. Yes, I think there are a variety of challenges. It's a challenging age. I think if anybody looking around the world today, there's a sense that things are uncertain. There's a certain anxiety about the future. There's a more talk about disorder, about the destabilization of the world, challenges of all sorts. Where I would kind of put it together, how I would put it together would be by pointing at two or three major types of challenges. One type of challenges is the classic one that we talk about in the book. It's the power transition challenge. It's the rise of new actors. And the most famous, the most talked about, of course, China, and then others who are also rising, India, Brazil, South Africa. So the challenge is to accommodate new states. There's also new types of actors that have to be accommodated. Non-state actors, the rising role of transnational groups, civil society groups, NGOs. So there's a kind of reshuffling of who needs to be at the table, who needs to be part of the governance system. The second place or type of challenge that you see today is over new issues. Every age has its issues driven by technology, by changes in the nature of states and ideologies. But here, of course, it's the challenges of the global commons, of rising Earth temperatures, global warming, sea levels, the challenges that flow from the warming of the planet. Other challenges in this that are clearly on the table: the spread of weapons of mass destruction, the ability of smaller groups, non-state actors to gain access to violence capability, organized crime, refugees, all these issues from global warming to destabilized weak states and refugee flows all have to do with problems that require multiple states to work together. No one country can tackle those problems. So problems of the global commons, of collective goods. And then finally, I would just add a problem that we didn't think was going to be a problem perhaps a few years ago, and that is the problem of the old patrons of the order, the United States in particular, but also Europe, the two parts of the world that have spent so much time investing in building the international order, defending it, now seem to be, to some extent, abandoning it. So President Trump clearly has issues with the international system and has been putting into play all sorts of issues about how the world may have to adjust to an America that is no longer willing to lead. So I think we have a full inbox. Indeed, the inbox is on fire. So I think young people today have to roll up their sleeves, read our book, and equip themselves with the analytical ability to sort out these problems and make sense of them.
Mike,
Yeah,
your thoughts?
I think that's a great summary of the landscape. I think something we don't always think about carefully enough in international politics, but we should, is about state leadership. And I think you can make an interesting contrast between the initial post-World War II period, where you had leaders who were kind of far-thinking, long-term thinking, and thinking about international order. For example, the American leaders who reconstructed Europe after the Second World War. Today, there seems to be, to a certain extent, in the major countries, a dearth of that kind of leadership thinking, whether you think about Vladimir Putin, who's a strong spoiler he's a disruptor of international relations, or Donald Trump, who talks about America first as if American interests can't be served by meeting international obligations, or even China's Xi Jinping, who really talks about Chinese greatness and not so much about the international order, international system itself. So one of the interesting challenges I think we face today is finding those leaders, particularly in powerful countries, but across the board, who can think outside of their own national context and think in terms of the international collective.
And I would add, if I might, 2 points. One, I think, going to your point, John, that there have been problems that were not readily anticipated. For example, at the turn of the millennium, the vulnerability of nations, even the advanced industrial democracies. I think the interference by Russia, certainly in the U.S. election, probably in other elections, there's evidence as well of use of cyber operations against Western financial institutions, possibly utilities, the risk that other groups non-state actors might undertake such operations, the attacks on 9/11, all underscore a level of ability of states to sustain very large, and societies to sustain very large costs and losses from outside forces that with relatively little technology or wealth or traditional forms of capability. Number 2, just to accent your point regarding the surprising, there has been a surprising, I think, and this is where our readers, and as you say, the students of looking ahead as when they roll up their sleeves, we've had some abandonment, I think, of commitment. For the one that comes to my mind, I would just add, is the Brexit vote. Was a bit surprising. Britain, for so many decades, had played and has played such an important positive role in European cooperation. Not always, perhaps in ways that were produced kind of diplomatic, were so friendly, but sometimes there were controversies. I'm thinking some of the Margaret Thatcher period, but we should remember that she both insisted upon a rebate, but she also pressed forward on the single market, and which has been so important to further European integration, as it turns out. And so that, I think, the Brexit vote and the loss of British active leadership, co-leadership in the European Union underscores your point that some of the most important contributors to global order, in addition to the United States, other countries, there's been some surprising, at least temporary, lessening of such leadership.
Yeah.
And a challenge is to see how we can organize perhaps the injection of new leadership or the revitalization, and perhaps I should say, and revitalization of old leadership.